Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's a very, very powerful distribution. It's one of the most solid ones. So it goes back a long way into the 90s. And Red Hat was actually the first distro that I used. I used it in the university where I studied on the first year. I had a Finnish colleague, student who was an exchange student from Finland, who introduced me to it. And it was Red Hat that I used first. And Red Hat has a big scandal in its hand. This is a satirical site. It's a satire site that you see in here. And it talks about the fact that Red Hat is going to basically destroy the very distribution which provided the general community access to the crown jewels of Red Hat at zero cost. The satirical site is so great. For various reasons, and I shared it with a bunch of people. It talks about how the only options you now have is basically to purchase something from Red Hat, or basically looking for something that barely exists because various clones of Red Hat Enterprise Linux are no longer around. There used to be several scientific ones. And about a year from now, instead of 10 years, in about a year from now, there will be no more support for CentOS. That's the main clone. It's the one that's been acquired by Red Hat. And the jokes on this site are really good, and they emphasize the fact that the only reason that Red Hat is doing that, or really IBM is doing that, because let's face it, IBM controls Red Hat and we shouldn't be fooling ourselves into anything else. The only reason IBM is doing that because Red Hat is firing lots of people, including Red Hat employees, as we covered earlier this year. They keep quiet about it, and now they just want to squeeze whatever they can out of the distribution. They don't care about the community. We suppose Fedora might be next to kind of lose some of its funding, and so yeah, it's not very good, is it? IBM doesn't really care about the community. Now, looking into the past of IBM, which is a subject we've covered in several dozens of articles, they have a very racist past. They made lots of money from eugenics kind of projects with governments, and they still do lots of surveillance and social control for various governments around the world. The Filipino government, the American government, British government. They do lots of government contracts. That's their old bread and butter, basically. And what they leave us with is the concept that they somehow fight for ethics and care about the general community. And they sent public relations agencies earlier this year to me. Didn't exactly surprise me because this isn't the first time they tried to do this to me. And they're trying to talk to me about this new campaign that they do called Embrace, with the emphasis on the word race. So it's EMB and then race. And I thought, wait a second, do you really want to talk about racial issue when it comes to IBM? And that didn't go very well. And I think IBM realized that people are going to mention the past of IBM, including eugenics against African Americans or Jamaicans and various other things, even World War II and apartheid in South Africa. And more recently, in the case of Python, Red Hat employees were pushing towards, first it was master and slave, and I don't want to really talk about it too much because I might say something that might be sort of miscomprehended and be perceived as kind of insensitive or something. But this is what I'm showing now is one of the worst things I've seen in recent years. And in Python, this goes about 2 years back. They even say to us that words like sanity check, like checking the sort of whether a code is doing something reasonable, that might be offensive to people who presumably might be insane. And I don't think so, and I don't think they ever complain about that. If somebody sees the word silly in the code, in the case of Python, we're talking about Python here, having the word silly in it. This is not a clinical situation. If you're silly, it's not something you're born with, usually. And if the word silly offends you when you see it in the code, it might say something like, this is a very silly operation. Do we need to remove that word, or even the word insane or crazy and stupid and lame and lunatic? If you're a lunatic, it's not that likely that you're going to be developing very good code anyway. I'm not talking about people with things like Asperger who can be really brilliant and very nice people. We're talking about people who are, in this case, described using kind of presumably insulting words, but this refers to code, and these are metaphors typically. There's no reason to remove them from Python. And this is the kind of thing that using the consortium, as far as the consortium, IBM has been pushing recently, the idea that IBM cares for community and for ethics because they're eliminating words from the code and they're trying to rebrand things, while at the same time taking the work of many volunteers, made available back to them through projects like CentOS, eliminating that, and then talking about ethics.